and welcome to the Class E podcast. I am your host, Mary Sturgill. This is the podcast that's brought to you through a partnership between the Hill Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Communication Studies Department here at Furman University. And this particular episode is part of our Everyday Entrepreneur series, in which we talk with graduates of the Greenville Starts program in hopes that us sharing their stories with you will help inspire you to take whatever idea you have and make it into a venture. So today we have a very special, sweet guest, Stufona Latta, who is the CEO and sugar maven at Bake Your Mark. Welcome to the show, Stufona.
Thank you for having me.
I love this, the sugar maven.
That's me.
That's what you call yourself?
It is, because I feel like, you know, all things dessert, it's sweet.
Yeah.
I'm very knowledgeable, so I'm a maven in it. So
there you
we go.
There you go. So how did you come up with Bake Your Mark? And exactly for our viewers and listeners who don't really know what that is, what is your company?
So Bake Your Mark is a dessert consulting company. I'm primarily business to business. And basically what I'm doing is that I am helping companies bake their mark, increase their branding through desserts.
Yeah, I love this. So give us some indications of the types of folks who come to you and say, okay, I want to bake my mark. And you're really putting their logos on edibles.
Correct.
Like, I should say, clarify edibles, sweets.
That's it. So I had one company reached out to me. It was a fairly new HR department and they didn't know their employees.
Yeah.
And so they said, hey, you know, we just want to have something to go with our chat. We're going to have them come in the break room. So I was like, okay, what about cookies? And they're like, okay. So they got their flavors together and it was called like Chat with Chris and Sean.
Yeah.
Get the cookies. They didn't know I was going to put their logo on it. So I did. And they were like, we don't care how this tastes. We're going to use them. I'm like, okay. And they had employees that they had the cookies. They had some employees that didn't make the chat, but they would come and say, hey, do you have any of those cookies left? We heard about them. Yeah. And so they were able to engage with employees they otherwise would have met just on the fact that we heard that the new HR team had some really good cookies.
Right.
You know, let's kind of check them out. So I think that's how it helps to kind of, as far as human resources, fairly new, you are able to engage with employees that you may have missed just because you work a different shift or whatnot. So that was good.
Here I am limiting my thinking is that I was thinking, oh, this is a great way to reach customers, but it's like you said, it's a great way to reach your employees as well. And I would think build loyalty and employee morale.
Correct. Yeah. And that was kind of my thinking behind it.
Yeah.
Is that it's about connection.
Yeah.
Whether you're connecting with your employees on a personal level or clients on a personal level. Because I do love a branded item. I have all my pens and notebooks. But if you really give a dessert, which let's just say, you know, they really like brownies. So you give them a brownie with
your logo right there.
Class C podcast on there.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I remember when my grandma made these. And then it's kind of, they're tying that food memory in with the podcast. And it's just like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's so smart. Yeah. So this can fill another niche in branding, as you say, with a company. I mean, they have their pins and their t-shirts and their whatevers, their swag that they give people. But we have such strong food memories. I think you're right about that if you connect through a food memory, then that kind of solidifies that branding even more than a t-shirt or a pin would.
Exactly. And that was kind of my rationale behind it. It's just like, if you can tie your brand to a positive memory, that's an instant connection. Yeah. And then it's kind of like, you know, let's say we want to see which podcast. Which university I want to attend.
Right.
Well, Furman did this for me. Yeah. And it was so good. Like they
I remember that chocolate chip cookie from the DH.
And I wasn't even a student there. So what would they do for me as, you know, once I'm enrolled? Right. And so that's kind of my thinking behind it is that, you know, if they just do this just because, what would they actually do once I'm a part of the Furman family? Right. And so
I love that. So how long ago did you start baking and how did you discover that you had that passion?
So I grew up around baking. Both my mother and father, they always kept something sweet in the house. But I was one that I had to stay out of the kitchen. I couldn't help. I could only lick the beaters afterwards. That was it. That was the extent. And so my mom passed when I was 20. I was a sophomore in college. And I didn't know about, I think I use it as a way to kind of continue that continuation. Well,
that connection to
that
her.
connection, correct.
Yeah.
And then my father just passed in December, and I found he had this famous apple cake, and I found the recipe for it. And
is that the one that you brought to us at Greenville Starts?
It's not.
Okay.
But yeah, I did bring an apple cake, but it isn't. Yeah, no, that's not it. It's a different one. So, and just that, it's like, all right, 2 different apple cakes. But this one reminds me of my
that's
father.
that memory that we're talking about, too. I mean, that connection. Yeah. So you have the connection to both your parents. And so that kind of, I love that, because that's kind of carrying on the traditions of the family, you know.
Yep. Yeah, and it was just their pastime. I don't know if they ever wanted to do it as a career.
Right.
But I was like, hey, you know, I'm good at it. And I would bring things to work all the time. Like anytime I see a recipe, I'll bake it, take it to work. And everybody be like, oh, we will buy that from you. You know, you need to go bake. And so that's what I did.
So when did you start Bake Your Mark?
I started Bake Your Mark April of 2020.
Oh, wow.
Right in the midst of the pandemic. Right when no one can go get anything or celebrate with loved ones.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I came up with the individual packaging, just to kind of, even though we're hopefully, you know, out of it, new normal, whatever you want to call it, still, just as that precaution, I do like to do individual servings and heat seal.
Individually packaged.
Right.
Like
so
this,
it's like, it's like, okay, whose hand's been on this?
Right. Let me show it that way. That's a good idea. And it makes them, if somebody's at an event or at a workshop or conference or whatever their company is hosting, they can take that and put it in their purse and have a little snack later. So it continues to kind of put that brand out there. So Stufona, you use the human resource as an example. You work in human resources, so you see the connections with that. What other aspects of that particular part of your background have you been able to incorporate into the business?
That, being in human resources, I really was able to see how some employees could feel like they're just a cog in the wheel. You know, you really don't get anything personalized. You have someone that works for your company, let's say 25 years. Yeah. They've gotten married, had children have grown up, all within that same company. How do you recognize that? Right. Like we recognize, you know, years of service and work anniversaries or birthdays. But what do you do for someone whose child has just graduated high school, going off to college, and now they're an empty nester? Yeah. All within the time frame of them working for you. Right.
They've lived their whole lives there. Their whole adult lives there. Yeah.
You know, what company actually says,
we appreciate you.
Yeah, we appreciate you. And, you know, eat on these brownies and on your way to take your child to college, because we know you're going to need them.
Yeah, exactly. Even little things like that make such a huge difference in making your employees feel like they are valued and they are appreciated.
And it's not a grand statement, because we all know it's just the little things. Like, you know, thinking of you, again, like my sister passed away while I worked at my previous company. And, you know, of course, we had, you know, condolences, but there really wasn't anything else. Right. And so for companies that really value or want to show that they value their employees, this is a way for them to do so.
And a personal way, I think.
It's very personal.
Yeah, I love this. So you were in the first Greenville Starts cohort with me. And we loved being your guinea pigs with all of the different recipes that you brought in and stuff. It was so much fun. What were some of the takeaways that you got from that experience that you have now put forth into your business?
For me, again, it's all about meeting new people. Yeah. And so we were all, you know, different stages of our entrepreneurial journey. We could all keep in touch. And I found ways that, they could help me. You know, I can use this in the future, or really be able to bounce off ideas. And what I really liked is kind of forging, I guess, the city of Greenville and Furman University. So you have like the educational proponent, which is what Greenville Starts was doing. Plus you had the city backing it, which says to me, you know, we believe in you.
Yeah, for sure.
I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the teams that we had and the speakers that we had. I actually met with Rem from Totem.
Oh, yeah.
Recently, about a month or so ago.
Yeah.
Just to kind of talk about it. And again, I wouldn't have been introduced to that particular company had I not participated in Greenville Starts.
Right.
So just kind of learning and getting the knowledge of these are some things that we need to consider while we're doing business.
Right. I completely agree with that. The such good connections for you, because as you're sitting here, I'm always brainstorming, as you know, entrepreneurs already all are. We all are. And I'm brainstorming, oh, what a great connection for you because of this and this and this, right? Mm-hmm. And so you never know so obviously we had the connection over the 26 or 29 people that were in our cohort, but all of the professionals in their areas, because that's one of the great things that Greenville Starts does, is that it brings professionals in, the area of law or in the area of marketing or PR and branding and that kind of thing. And because we can't be experts in every single thing. So we got all of those touch points with all of those great speakers and all those great people and connections that we can now take with us and use. Or say, hey, I connect with other people, because I look at myself as a connector as well. And I'm like, oh, well, I met this person that would really help you with your venture. And the wider we cast those nets with our connections and our network, the better we all are.
Exactly. And then for me, I know there's always a lot of talk, especially with tech companies, about scaling up, scale up, sell it off. But what happens is that once the business has been sold, yes, it's good for the owner, but there's no longer an economic impact, potentially, if they leave Greenville.
Right.
Whereas for me...
Which many of them do. When they scale up like that, they do leave Greenville. Yeah.
For me, I want to be kind of rooted. So I always say scale deep. I kind of want to be entrenched in the community.
I just got
versus So, I want to be entrenched in my community. I am a native of this area. So, and I've seen the changes and I see the good things.
Right.
And so, again, like I said, a company that follows an employee, I want a company to use me for that same thing. I remember when they started up and now they are celebrating their 5 million mark of revenue.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're still here and we're all in this together. Right. And I would love for my product to be a part of that. From the start, hey, new employee, here you go, to, this employee is now the CFO.
Right.
But they started out as an analyst. Anything. Right. So just that growth and that development within the company, I want to be able to do that and keep it here in Greenville.
I love that, because most of the time you're right, as entrepreneurs, especially in the tech field, it's like, let's grow the business, scale it up, and then somebody's going to purchase this and we're going to make a lot of money off of this. And that's their sole goal, which is fine. And that's great. That's amazing for them. And amazing for sometimes amazing for the people who work there, if they're well taken care of in that transition. But you're right. Oftentimes those companies do then leave and take, because they're part of a larger company now. They're headquartered now in Nebraska or wherever, right? Or Silicon Valley or whatever. And so I think what you said about scaling deep is so important as well. And I think that many of us need to take another look at that, right? So it's not just about scaling up, it's about keeping our roots here, but growing as much as we can. And then, of course, you could be nationwide because you can ship and you can do whatever. So it's
but I'm still paying these South Carolina taxes.
Exactly. And that's something that you learn about in Greenville Starts is when you have to do these things. But the potential for that is still there as well, right? And you could franchise, and there are multiple ways that you could scale up it while still staying deep. And I think that's what, as entrepreneurs, we look at and we recognize, right? That's it. What is a piece of advice that you have for someone who thinks they have a good idea, but they haven't taken that step yet? Or maybe they've started and now they're stuck and they just don't know where to go from here.
My first piece of advice would be for them to get out of their own way. Because really that's what stops us.
That's so
our
true.
Fear, our just whatever, like we feel like inadequacy or anything, but there is someone to buy everything.
Right.
And you can see, like, man, why didn't I think of that banana slicer?
Right.
You know,
Right.
people buy 'em, even if it's just a gag gift.
Right. Well,
People
I mean,
buy 'em.
so many people love gadgets, especially. So I would buy a banana slicer.
Yeah. And then the second piece would be, again, to find a program such as Greenville Starts to participate in, to see that you're not alone. Like, yes, you may have this particular endeavor that's different from everyone else, but you're pretty much going to find people that are in the same starting place as you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so even though you may be out in left field, y'all are playing baseball. So
Exactly.
Just a team.
And it takes everybody to create that ecosystem and create that team. Because, I mean, I learned so much from everybody in that class, and just about different, even though our businesses were totally different, there are certain things that you can take, obviously, and apply to your own business, even if it's totally, like, we had a bunch of really cool tech guys in our cohort that I sat and talked with, and I learned a lot, and I was like, okay, I can take that idea and
We all need
apply it to
marketing.
mine.
We all need to protect our brand.
Yep.
So, we all have to make sure we're following the right rules and regulations, again, following our taxes or whatnot,
Right.
making sure we have the proper registration. So, there are basic tenets that we all have to follow regardless of what we're actually pursuing.
Right. 100%. So if someone wants to hire you to brand some items from some really delicious dessert items for their company, how do they get in touch with you?
They can submit a request via my website, www.bakeyourmark.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at bake.your.mark.
Stufona, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Oh, you have a special offer for anybody who listens to the podcast.
That's right.
Yeah,
so
let's talk about that.
anyone that wants to try me out, which I don't know why you wouldn't, but
I don't know either, because it's good.
You can get 10% off your first order. Just mention that you heard about me on Class E.
All right, perfect. So make sure that you mention to her when you talk to her that you heard about her company, Bake Your Mark, on the Class E podcast, and you get 10% off your first order. That's a great little discount there. Stufona, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that does it for this episode of the Class E podcast. I am your host, Mary Sturgill. Remember, this is the podcast that's brought to you through a partnership between the Hill Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Furman University and the Communication Studies Department. It is produced by two student producers, Kayla Patterson and Eliza Polich. This is a true example of the Furman advantage because these students do everything it takes to put on this podcast, including the marketing and promotion for it. The other thing I want to remind you is that if you want to join the Greenville Starts program, all you have to do is Google Greenville Starts and Furman, and it should be the very first thing that pops up when you do that. And check to see, the cohort may be full, but you can get yourself on the list for the very next cohort because this is an ongoing thing. So make sure that you, or if you have friends or family members who have a great idea, push them to do that because they will not regret it. All right, that does it for this episode of the Class E podcast. Again, I'm your host, Mary Sturgill. Dream big, everybody.